sharing with you today. Great to see so many of you could make it all. And yes, and we're all, yes, both cameras are on, great. If some of you were at our remote facilitation webinar last week, there is one big difference. This is all going to be in English, of course. And then the other thing that we wanted to tell you guys is that there are a few different tips and tricks, and we have a different host with us as well today. Actually, let's start with that. Let's start with a few introductions so that we get ourselves acquainted with who is going to be online with you today. Myself, my name is Liisa Benmergui, and I've been a designer in the business for about 15 years now. I'm currently service design lead at Frantic. I do interaction design and service design, and I practice a lot of remote meetings, a lot of distributed team meetings. And I think that, yeah, I wouldn't take much more time. I have my colleague Sjöman online with me.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Sjöman, and I am an Agile coach at Frantic. My background is actually in project and team management. And for the past few years, I've been more focusing on Agile coaching mainly. And yeah, I have a special interest on how to build that psychological safety and an atmosphere of trust online. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here today. So good to be
Great.
here.
I love that we're doing this together. It's a really, it's a nice pair to have for this day.
Yeah.
And we have a third partner in crime here. We have Aino Ahoniemi, who's our chat moderator for today. And she will be checking if you have any questions, comments in the chat. As well, as you can see on the top of the screen, there is a website for your for our Q&A. So we're using a service in Google Hangouts called Audience Tools, and it's been useful last time, and hopefully you'll all find your way there in the chat. I think Aina just added the link there. And for those of you not familiar with Frantic, we are a digital service consultancy. We develop our clients' digital business and customer experience through human-centered design and, of course, modern application development. So we are a full-stack agency. Before we begin, I just wanted to do a couple of more housekeeping items. Yes, just so you all know, your mics should all be automatically muted because we are several online, and that's one of the bonuses of a Hangout is that it automatically mutes these. And if you want, you can have your video on, but I think that since you're not going to be talking, it won't show up. Also, we will be sharing the recording by email after this, along with the feedback form. So we definitely want to hear from you about how it went, what we can improve, and so on. And yeah, I already mentioned that we have the chat just in case. We're double checking that everybody knows where to find the chat. In the top right corner, there is a funny speech bubble kind of icon, and clicking that, you should find your way to the chat. And Aino there will be your host. And if you have any questions, please do use the Q&A app that we have online. And then yeah, so without further ado, let's get to the topic at hand. Why are we here today, Ida? Why are we talking about facilitation?
So we're definitely in an interesting turning point at the moment. And like many other companies, at Frantic, we've had so many opportunities to actually work remotely already before all this corona crisis. But mastering remote work and skillful facilitation are no longer just an option, but more like a necessity now. So we've had to actually orient ourselves really quickly to the situation with new restrictions as well. So we've had to consider what happens when your clients or partners are not so familiar with remote working. Different companies have different restrictions on applications and technology. So how can we really quickly tackle that and provide still the same service for our clients and partners? So yeah, we've had to consider several different factors, and we've kind of collected all these together, and that's why we're here today. So our goal is to kind of encourage you to improve and try new things and become a more effective remote facilitator.
Yeah.
Yeah. So today's session, we're going to break down into the following sections. So we're going to jump right into what you want to consider before, during, and after your session. So things that you really want to think about and kind of prepare, and then of course during and after. Then we'll stop along the way with some questions. So don't hesitate using the chat, like Liisa said, or the Q&A. So we really appreciate all the questions and insights as well. So if you have your ideas that you want to share, feel free to do that as well. We'll continue with a bit of discussion about pitfalls, so all the little problems that you might face, and then, of course, close the session with kind of bringing everything together with some closing remarks. So yeah, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I'm excited about what we're having today. We're going to start with, of course, before. So we want to look at the before, during, and after. And before, it's before any session, a remote session, on-site or online, you always want to be looking at the basics. And we can emphasize more that goals over methods is really what you want to be striving for. This is a fundamental. We're not going to be lecturing you on how to be the best facilitator you can be, but we're really trying to find the angle that remote brings to the mix. And I was reading an article just recently by John Maeda, and he was, to summarize, states that it's already difficult enough to be effective in on-site meetings. So I think that going remote adds even more pressure. And so we want you to improve all your meetings by running through the basics. And here are some things that we want you to want to talk to you about, is that defining the session goals is really important. And that's something that we should always start with: the goals, what you want to achieve, and what kind of workshop or meeting will you have. Who will you have is the next thing, and really thinking about how many will be involved is also something really important in remote, as well as taking into consideration any time zones and so on. So that's one thing. And then the last part that I would say is really key, and today's focus, is how. So talking about, we're not going to be talking per se about technology, as we're not tech experts, but we are people who strive to be experimenting with tech, and we really need to take into account time as well. And then when you're looking at all these, the who and the how come together in that. How tech savvy are your participants, and how will you overcome these things? So that's one thing you want to be thinking about. And speaking of technologies, that's like one of the biggest points. So we wanted to bring it up right away.
Yeah,
Let's
definitely. Yeah, so how you do it. So when you are actually planning a remote session, you really want to consider, like Liisa said, the size of your audience and the level of interactivity that you are going to have. So of course, for just online meetings where you have less interactivity, you maybe have a video, sound, maybe you're sharing your screen. Of course, easy tools like Google Hangouts or Teams or Zoom work really well with that. But then when you have bigger groups, as you've probably experienced, there are different options that you can do to kind of separate people into smaller groups. So this is really important, because this is a key part of doing workshops face-to-face. So you usually divide people into pairs or smaller groups. So what happens when you go online and you need the same features and you need the same service?
Yeah, and that's something that we've been discussing a lot, is that getting that intimacy and getting the people talking. And many times people are less intimidated by talking when they are talking. First of all, if they're not familiar with each other, really getting down to 2 or 3 persons is quite key. And then having them discuss the topic, and then maybe having one of the persons present, or if you're possibly able to have more facilitators, having people in those small breakout meetings, breakout rooms. And Zoom has this built in, as well as Teams. So that's one, those are a couple of things to think about when you're trying to find that kind of like how to make the on-site remote and bring on-site things into remote. That's one thing that we've noticed is really key in terms of getting things to work. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, just having that opportunity and just like thinking about different options and being creative with that. Then also about the interactivity, as I mentioned, is that's a key point as well. This is something, again, you would use Post-its or canvases or whiteboards, and again, going online, you kind of just put this away and just try to like concentrate on your core agenda. So we've used Miro and Mural, which are great tools for kind of online digital whiteboards, and you can use them for various things. And then also I'm going to have a couple of examples of how to use Jamboard as well. That's a Google service that we are using, which is a fun tool just to kind of do different types of exercises where you would use maybe Post-its, for example.
Great. I think that like one really big point that we have to always think about beforehand, during as well, is managing expectations. And in remote facilitation, it really becomes key to thinking what your participants are expecting. They might have lower standards or they might have higher standards because they think like, okay, well, now we're going to be using this technology and everything's going to go even smoother because we're going digital. So you don't want to be too rigid, but you want to let people know what to expect beforehand. And one thing that here's a list of ideas that I tend to go through and think about, and we've been amassing here at Frantic as well, is that sending materials to participants prior to the event or meeting. If it's going to be a large scale workshop, you might even want to give some homework, some prep work, and and maybe even time boxing and telling them like, hey, if you have 30 minutes, please use that to acquaint yourself with the material. So you kind of tell them already, it's not going to take a long time. If you have 15 to 20 minutes, please read through the materials because you want people to be ready already. And the remote facilitation, you don't have, maybe you don't even have the chance to lengthen the meeting easily. Now, how will you deal with connection lags is one thing. As you, I think that one really good idea is to survey your participants. So ask them prior to the event that how their connections have been working. If you know that people are having trouble with their bandwidth, then maybe you will be thinking a little bit already outside the box, kind of wondering how you're going to prepare for that. Then sharing instructions about the chosen technology. It's always useful if you can't, let's say, if you can send a tutorial that's already made by the company. There are almost all of them have really great tutorials or YouTube videos. And then another thing is to maybe even add 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning for an exercise where you will actually teach how to use or what level of usage you want to use. Now, will the session be on, like, do you want people to have cameras on? Will it be recorded? All these things have to be told prior to. It's sort of, now the context is people are not in their offices, people are at home, people might have their children around. You know, we've all seen that BBC viral video where children are walking in and out. My children do too. So basically, what I'd say is that giving everybody a heads up about these things just calms them down, makes them knowledgeable. And then, of course, brace yourself for technical problems. We haven't had any yet. I'm just waiting. We're just like hoping, because every time we tried this out, something has happened. So I'm really sitting here going, let's just hope that you see us all the way till the end and the problems start when you guys go offline. Yeah, okay, yeah. But yeah, so actually, we're cutting that before kind of short and sweet. And I think there are some questions already in the Q&A. And I think I'll just present one of these. There's a few here. So I think, wait, let's see. Actually, we have one question here. I'm going to present it, but I think we will be discussing something along this line. So people seem to become more passive in the online meetings, maybe even multitasking other things at the same time. Can you give some good examples for workshop practices to activate all people? Now, I'm presenting this because when we're just going to be going into the next section, we will be discussing quite a few activities on how to activate and how to engage people. So I wanted to give this person a heads up that we will be talking about this soon. So stay online, stay tuned. And then if we don't catch that, like, please, let's get back to this question and see if there's something else that we can add. I think that there was still another one here. When things become, here. These are a lot of the ones that are enduring, but I think that here, I think this one, let's see. Okay, so there's been a couple of thumbs up on this one. When things become heated, people start talking over each other. And that works even worse than in real life. How do you deal with this? Oh my gosh, yeah. Okay, we'll be talking a little bit enduring, but I think that this one is also one that I would state that the rules of engagement, like how are you going to set up kind of like your housekeeping and discuss this? And you might have, we have a couple of methods coming up on how to kind of like help people govern situations, but as a facilitator, there is really no easy answer to this. I think that muting people is not the answer. If it gets to that point, I think they're having a really big problem. I think Ian is laughing here, but it's true. But I think that in these kind of situations, I have a couple of methods down in a little bit later in the session, the 1 minute card and the parking lot kind of topics. So we'll talk about those in a little while. And but I'm going to try to think about this one. If there's something that comes into mind, Ida, about what we'll start talking over.
There's something that kind of came up to my mind. Like you said, it's really important to make sure in the beginning that you set those ground rules. So what's going to happen next, and then also something that we've used in some of our trainings as well is the sort of like, which we're going to discuss as well with the 1 minute card later, but Elmo, so enough, let's move on kind of a thing. So how you can kind of stop the conversation without actually kind of making anyone feel any like worse or anything like that. So kind of a soft way to say like, hey, we've discussed this enough and let's move on. So we're going to have a couple of examples later on. So how you can kind of stop the conversation there. And yeah, definitely don't mute people forcefully.
Yeah, that might be a little bit too forward, but I think we're going to move on, and let's hope that we do get to those, answering those. And yeah, so here, I think that what we'll do is we'll go on to during, and what happens during the session. And these questions were great questions already, so keep them coming. I really like these ones. So during the session, we've sent out the invites. We've sent out all the information that we just talked about. And what should we take into account right at the beginning?
Yeah, so here I'm going to share a checklist, which I usually go through with all my meetings, especially now remote. I'm kind of considering these things a bit more than in a sort of face-to-face setting. So yeah, this is like the place where people are coming in. So you want to give them time to settle down. And yeah, of course, I usually start with just introducing myself and introducing if there's other facilitators and so on, just to kind of let people know how I'm here. And if you have any questions, let me know. Then I like to encourage a little bit of small talk. I know this might be a bit difficult, especially on an online setting and depending on how many people you actually have in. But if you have a smaller group, it's always nice to kind of acknowledge people coming in, asking them, hey, do you have your pen and paper, which I probably asked you to get beforehand. And now you have a couple of minutes to settle down. Then something that I feel is really important when we're talking about psychological safety and trust is to make people feel comfortable. So I like to ask people to beforehand already to like make sure you have coffee or tea or something to kind of make you feel good and comfortable. Then to the heavy part. So obviously I go through what's going to happen. So make sure that people know what's going to happen. I usually provide this in writing as well so that they can follow themselves. And yeah, just make sure that they know the timetable and they know when they can ask questions and so on. And then we get into the housekeeping that we've talked about already today a bit. So this is where you exactly tell people, hey, this is how we're going to communicate, and this is the way I'm going to be facilitating. So you're going to make it very clear if there are situations where people are, for example, talking over each other, how you as a facilitator can interrupt them, for example. So kind of agreeing on the ground rules and the ways that you want to work with. Then something that I've found really interesting is also that especially when we go into bigger groups or webinars or big meetings with like almost over 100 people, there are a lot of people that come in and they're really worried that is my camera on, is my mic on? So they want to make sure that all this is kind of working. So you can actually tackle this beforehand and you can tell them, hey, we've muted everyone. We've made sure that like your camera isn't here. Please use the chat if you have something you want to share. And so on, just kind of like beforehand already and kind of saying that so that people don't worry about it too much.
Yeah, actually, there's one great question that has to do with this, and I think we could use it, just take it over here right at the beginning, because I think we can put this one in the middle here. Yeah. As a presenter, it's really weird having even a 5-minute presentation when I could see no one's face, voice, or any reaction at all. Okay, well, welcome to our webinar. How do you deal with this? Should I just force everyone's cameras on, even in larger company info meetings, which can involve 50 people? So yeah, so this is something really that's part of the setting the mood and how you feel as a facilitator. I think, Ida, you brought up exactly that. Then when you're in a larger group, you might be already telling people that, hey, the mute is on, like everybody's muted, and cameras can or cannot be on. I mean, that's really your choice, but it can be weird, but I think you have to embrace the weirdness. It sounds a bit weird, but part of remote, it's if you have a large group, think of yourself on a stage as well.
Yeah.
You may think that you can see the people, but you're not actually looking. It's just this like kind of like a unfocused sea of persons, and you're always looking at the back of the room so that you look like you're projecting. Same thing here. I think that you want to feel that you are part of the group. But as Ida brought up also, I think that encouraging some sort of small, even in the chat, like asking everybody, hey, how are you doing? Do it that way. Maybe that will give like less facelessness to the people. And then maybe even having a round of like putting everybody's, you know, if you're using Zoom or some other, like with Hangouts, getting the grid view on, then you can see everybody's faces. You might even want to take a screenshot and share it and say, okay, we're all in this together, or, you know, share that feeling. So that would be maybe one way. I know it feels weird, but I think that you just start getting used to it, but you maybe try to bring these small ways, bring people in. I think that, you know, those kind of like taking pictures of what's happening and sharing it with the group is something like very human. Your own selfie there, like I'm alone, but I'm here, you know? So that could be one way.
Yeah, definitely, like you said, getting the interactivity there. That's really, exactly. Even with the bigger groups,
Yeah. So now we want to support the constructive interaction, and these were exactly what people were asking for at the beginning about how do people engage and make sure people are engaged and part of the team, part of the group, and in this part, I think that we really want to support everybody and make it really like equal. And I think that we have some really nice exercises that we've been doing. And Ida, you have one that you always have in your back pocket.
Yeah, my favorite. So so I always start, no matter how big the meeting is, with a check-in exercise. Of course, I modify it based on how many people are online. With smaller groups, of course, you can again get much more of interactivity, and with bigger groups, you might want to give them something to do on their own. But the point is to help the participants to actually focus on problem solving. So we really want people to be there. I usually say this out loud as well, asking people, hey, please put your phone on silent, and make sure that like you're not distracted, because I want your full attention, because we are here today because of, and then I kind of explain why we're there. So kind of making sure that people understand that this is important. And check-in exercise is definitely designed to kind of strengthen that psychological safety, not only for you, but also for the participants. So it's kind of a thing like the previous question. So this is also for you a way to kind of feel that you're there and there's actually people on the other side and they're interacting with you. So this is a great way to strengthen that. I'm not going to go too deep into SCARF model, but if you're familiar with David Rock's work, you know it's really important for our brains as well to be in that towards state. So we want people to actually be thinking about solving the actual problems and kind of thinking on an optimal level. But yeah, the most important thing here is to keep it simple and short, but still meaningful. So you really want to think about beforehand what you want people to share. If you want people to dive really deep into the negativity, how are you going to actually cut them out if it goes too long or too deep, without actually compromising that trust that you're building there? I also like to make it fun, so I try to think about the group, like what kind of a group it is and what kinds of things they need. And yeah, like I always say, do it anyway. I don't care if it's a board of directors or a team, just do it anyway, because this is also something that, for example, the higher up you go with the hierarchy, it's often the case that they haven't actually done these things, and they feel that their time is really valuable, and they're like, why we're wasting time for this? But then again, when you do this and you keep it very compact and you explain them why you're doing it, it becomes really interesting, and it gives you really, really interesting data as well of like how people are acting and how people are interacting with you. And yeah, with teams, of course, it's usually teams are like, oh, we've done this so many times, we know what's going on. So
Yeah, I think that it's a simple exercise. I really think that it's easy on the facilitator as well. And if you're recording a session, or you have let's say a scribe, a facilitator who's writing up notes, then they can really take into account like what was said, and it's really an immediate feedback.
Yeah.
Before you even start. Yeah, I definitely agree. So now everybody's been worried about how to get people engaged. What about when they don't talk? Like what happens?
Yeah, exactly. That's the
Is it okay?
Yeah, because silence is golden. You have this atmosphere of trust now. You have people engaged. You know, that silence is where the thinking actually happens, and that's where people find their insights. So you really want to practice that active listening here. You want to make sure that like you really yourself is engaged, and you know what's going on, and you're listening to people. You're reflecting back on what they're saying, and making sure that people get to talk and get to explain what they want to explain. And yeah, and then I also think about speaking, so how you're speaking. So this is kind of a pathway to that as well. So I call it I know it as an assist-G model. So this is again David Rock's work, not mine. So of course we're talking now about talking. So how do you talk, especially online, because you don't have that really valuable body language anymore. So you really have to trust your ability to speak. So firstly, you really want to be succinct. So you want to make sure that your message is really short and simple and people can understand it. Provide that text that they can follow up and so that they feel that they know where they are, and it's everything is kind of simple. Be very specific. So if you say that you're going to do something, you have an agenda, keep to that. Make sure that you're keeping to that as well. And then be generous. So this is really important. So like make sure that you're equal and you're helping people to communicate. So as a facilitator, that's your role. Your role is not so much being there as giving your opinions or kind of doing that, but it's more about facilitating the conversation and making sure that everyone's voices are heard equally. So I think that's really important to remember.
Yeah, I think the equality and the transparency are really, really important, especially in remote. It might feel weird. Like we had the question about speaking a long time and nobody is, you can't see reactions and so on. But I think that it's really important that you then you always constantly try to connect with your listeners. So if you do have to speak for 5 minutes, you might also be thinking like, okay, well, why am I speaking? Is there a purpose for this? And if there is, if that's the shortest and sweetest way that you can say it is in 5 or 10 minutes, if you need to use that chunk of time, then like us, we also believe that then when you're speaking, you should have some, well, now we have a presentation. We want to kind of complement the speech. And if there is a need for that, then so that people really are staying there with you. And we're talking about giving people things to do and being active. Then one really great method is using design games. Now, I mean, games in general, any type of playfulness and an activity that you can really use eliminates hierarchies. So if you have people in your workshop or in your meetings that exactly like that, maybe tend to speak over each other, if you already know this, or have a status in the company or between companies, then you might have somebody exactly like that from the board of directors, a CEO type, C-suite type. And then you might have somebody who may feel intimidated by this status or not. That's great. We shouldn't be. But if it's there, you want to eliminate those hierarchies. You want people to be playing by the rules of the game. Exactly that. It sounds cheesy, it sounds corny, but it's true. People are brought together under a common goal. It could be a common idea of like, okay, now we're all together going to tackle this problem or in this game, and the rules are so and so. So you can do this, you can't do this. And all of a sudden, it's like everybody has to be given a turn to talk. There might be rounds where everybody has to say one line and things like that. So we've been using a lot of games, and this promotes a lot of group creativity. It relaxes people. Some people get really competitive, but you want to be looking at the games as not a competition, but rather a way of communicating. So let's see. So so actually, the one thing that I would say is that we've had now in Finland, we have some games that we've been using online, and that are actually physical, but physical versions as well. But I think that there are multiple ways of finding game-like elements to add to your to any remote session. And this is one thing that I think that I could have a webinar all about games and remote. So we can't go into this too deeply, but it's one way of thinking about keeping people active. And I think that there's another side to this. So let's see, they're just, sorry, I was just noticing there was some stuff happening in the chat. So I got distracted personally. I just noticed that there was something happening. But yeah, we'll get to those in a minute. But how to keep the session active and moving forward is really important. And you don't want cognitive overload. You don't want to like push the people, but you want to give them things like they can draw, they can write, they can make, they can discuss, but you want to give them something to do. You might ask them to draw something on paper, or even using canvases like we've been talking a lot about, is like different types of worksheets and so on. And those, some worksheets can be sent prior if you're not sure about the technology, and people can use them as the basis. Or then like we have our couple of examples now with Ida using Jamboard, and it's proved very useful and rather easy actually.
Yeah, so this is another tool. It might be familiar to many of you already on a face-to-face context, but here we've actually used it with the Jamboard. So just doing these similar kinds of things where people can actually relate to each other, they can learn together. So this is very much the same as Liisa said about the design game. So you really want to bring people to that same level, make sure that they are relating. And what I always love about this is that it focuses on the positive, but it still gives you room for that kind of where can we improve, so it doesn't go overly positive. But yeah, it's a really good tool to kind of share those valuable learnings together and learn together. But then also we've used 2 other exercises. So we've used these two that with one of our competence groups here in Frantic as well. So kind of reflecting on what's happening now. So we are in a very strange place when we have to kind of quickly work or change our ways of working. So it's really important to give people this moment of reflecting how they're feeling. Again, psychological safety, a really important part. I think that it's very important to think about how people are feeling and what are they thinking about these things, so that we can actually analyze how they act and what's going to happen. So if you, for example, want to be sure that your employees are working and being efficient, you really want to bring that feeling and thinking side of it as well. You don't want to just push them to work hard or harder, but you just really want to give them space to reflect their feelings as well. So here, I think also something to kind of keep in mind is to have fun. I know humor might be difficult, but for example, this one on the top that we did with Jamboard is that Jamboard has a very basic tool for drawing. So I asked everyone to kind of draw what was the most important thing for the past 3 weeks that has kind of helped them to get through. And people really started being super artistic. They brought pictures from Google, and then they were drawing with it looks a little bit like an old paint application, and so on. So it was actually fun as well. But then at the end of the exercise, of course, for me as a facilitator, a really important part, collect the data, have a purpose for your exercises. So this is something that you can combine with your core agenda. So you have this core agenda, which might be really heavy, like we need to decide things and we need to move forward. But then you want to combine it with something that gives people time to reflect their feelings as well. So yeah, collect the data, have a purpose. That's really important with these ones, although they're fun.
Yeah, exactly. I think that fun is not just for fun.
Yeah.
You have to really have purpose. You don't want to waste people's time. And you can say also some things can be warm-up exercises, but warm-ups can also be fruitful. Yeah. And so on. So I think that everything should have meaning and be meaningful to some extent. As a facilitator, you should be trying to get something out of it as well. I think that keeping people in the know about what is happening next is really important. It seems obvious, but I think that one thing that I've noticed is that, especially in remote, you might not notice, it's hard to keep track of time. You're looking at, I mean, now with a presentation, we do have a timer here, but if you need one, then you might want to put a clock on your table, even for yourself, or kind of timing sections, and then kind of having people say, okay, we'll go over a little bit. And there's Mark Stickdorn had this really great thing about fluid timekeeping. So it's kind of like keeping track of the session, but then going, okay, something needs a little bit more time. Give it more time. It's okay, but then you have to remember, you give something more time, you give something more time, something at the end gets like lost. And I think that that's one thing that we've been discussing is also, it's like so easy to give everything at the beginning a lot of time, and really trying to stick to that timetable and your agenda. So what are you trying to achieve? So if something is meaningful and fruitful, even if it's the fun thing, then you might be like, okay, let's put this to the next session or not do this exercise. So one thing that we've been talking about, and that this was something that somebody was asking earlier about heated discussions, people talking over each other, or somebody being maybe long-winded, to be maybe putting a positive spin on it, maybe having a lot to say about a topic, or you know, yourself, maybe you as a facilitator, you know, you might want to have like this so you want to share the governing of like chairing the meeting with all of the participants. And the 1 minute card is a great tool. In on-site, it's usually people draw their own, and you have a card and it says 1 minute, or it has a clock on it, an icon or something, or an emoji or something that people have drawn. And then, but in on-site, in remote, you can just use your chat windows, or even have, if you have few people, then your video, and then just have people waving their hands like with the, but it's easiest to use the chat. I think it blings, it tells people stuff, and the 1 minute card signals to the person that's speaking to end their turn within 1 minute, basically. And anyone can use the 1 minute card. It's really useful, especially if you have these kind of situations a lot where this person was talking about this, talking over each other. It really is easy. And it's an equalizer, and you talk about it at the beginning though. You give those rules at the beginning. As a facilitator, you have to make sure that everybody knows the rules of engagement. And one thing that we've been testing out is a plugin called the Nod plugin in Google Chrome and Firefox. But basically, you have to ask people to have this installed prior to you beginning your session. And in this one, you have these kind of emojis that can be just kind of like little expressive emotions. So to those who were saying that it's a faceless meeting, things like this could be added if you're able to. Find these kind of, these were really cute, so that these emojis just go on the screen, but then they're fleeting. They're just on for a little while and then they fade. So it's not like chat, they don't stay forever. And then the raising your hand actually stays until somebody acknowledges that somebody has raised their hand, and then you close it. So you have these kind of like visual cues. And I think this is quite useful. And if you can use this type of a tool, then that can help with this facelessness and so on, and especially in large crowds. It mimics some things that we've seen in Facebook Messenger, Facebook Live, and things like that, where you have these emojis, you can put hearts and stuff like that, and give your commentary that way. And then one that was also mentioned earlier that we were talking that we would bring up today is that the parking lot, it's traditional in some ways. Some people might already know about this technique, or may be very familiar, not even just know, but may be familiar, but bringing it online is easy. It helps you stay focused. So basically, normally you'd have a big a flat board where you'd have Post-its, or people could write down what a question that maybe is not relevant to the current session. So you don't want to just get derailed by every question that's being asked in a session. And many times they're very, very relevant in the big picture, but not in that session. So we want to make sure that those persons, like everybody, is noted. And the more introverted and more quiet persons might also be more apt to add their questions and state them, because they don't have to state them out loud. They can open up. And if you use a shared Slack post, let's say, or a Google Doc, an online Microsoft Word document, so something shared, it's easy for anybody to add a question or an idea. And then at the end, you can just quickly run through them, saying, okay, here are the questions that were added in the parking lot. We'll take care of, you'll go through them afterwards or whatever. So yeah, so since we talked about the check-in, let's talk about the checkout exercise, so that we can keep in time. I just noticed the time myself. I'm like, it's getting a little long-winded there. So
as it happens usually with checkout exercises, at this point of your session, you probably have 5 to 2 minutes left. And again, you don't want to keep people too long. You know that they have probably another online meeting starting right after yours. So you really want to make sure that you have time for this. So again, time management already beforehand, kind of thinking about how you use your time, and be ready to adapt really quickly. So you might have this great idea for a checkout exercise, and then you have to kind of tone it down into just asking a number on a scale of 1 to 5 from people, or just having an emoji or a weather kind of a indicator or something, just to get the feeling of how people are doing after your session. The most important part, again, is to have a purpose. You really want people to go out and think about your session as a valuable thing. Like, hey, I learned something feels more clarified now, we accomplished something together. So you want to make sure that's happening. So phrase your question based on that. And yeah, just keep it really simple. But again, remember to collect the data. So you really want to know the kind of that instant feedback that you'll get here. So it's a very valuable thing. But yeah, time management, because this is usually something that really drops out the first, because that's like the last thing you do.
Yeah, but it's super important, and I really do encourage everybody to do these check-in, check-outs, because it kind of it opens up the session and it closes it quite naturally. Then basically, to summarize this part, I think we should just really state that be brave, try new methods and ways of doing things, and don't be afraid. People are quite forgiving right now. People are in their homes. People are in weird contexts. Some people, well, always, people deal with stress and chaos differently. So some people might go to the negative and be very critical of you as a presenter or as a facilitator. But most of the time, I would say it's the 80%. Most people are just very, very forgiving. And don't forget the lo-fi versions. Use your mobile phones, a camera, sending in pics in written text. Things like this. Just be creative, but be also kind of like, hey, this is okay. This is the new normal. It's okay to be, mixing digital and analog together, and that's not a problem. Now, we'll just briefly, I'll just jump to the after, and of course you're gonna debrief. You're going to go over stuff with your facilitators, check in, and so on. But there's one thing that I would just say, it's one that you should definitely do, is celebrate your accomplishments and take a breather. So it does take a lot out of people, and if you haven't been doing a lot of remote facilitation, then you really will feel it. You'll feel like, whew, it takes a lot of energy. And but yeah, I think that in right here, I think we have a great question about that we were just discussing, and here I'm just going to present it. So we have I think it was Jarno who was in the chat, who I was noticing. Yeah, Dahlberg. Okay, so his question was, tomorrow I'll be speaking to about 250 people for 60 minutes. Wow. That's great. They will not have the material available in advance. They're in the US, and the tool of choice is Cisco WebEx. The tech is okay for me. Does it make sense to have video on for 1 hour along with my slides and live demos? Also, what's the best way to take questions? So I think that maybe I'm not too familiar with WebEx, just because I haven't had to use it, but so I won't comment on that. But I think that your question is, does it make sense to have video on for 1 hour along with my slides and live demos? So I think that your video, as much as possible, if you can be seen, is quite good. If you're able to, I don't know if in WebEx you can see the person at the same time while they are presenting. Sometimes these, like in Hangouts, there are some, it depends on what the person's using. If they're using a mobile device, they might never see your face, they're looking at your slides. Okay, so yeah, Jarno's saying that yes, you can. So I think personally for you, if you are okay with it, I think it's great that you bring that human side. But of course, 250 persons, they're muted, there's no video, they're an audience. Just think of yourself on a stage giving a talk. So unless you have, and if you're going to have them doing anything, will you have them being interactive? It really is up to you. If you're alone and taking questions, I would really try to keep to one format. So if you have a chat or even some sort of a shared document, but 250 people, I would stick to whatever the tool, the chat tool is in WebEx, because you're going to have too much stuff. Actually, you know what? I just got a ping from our IT manager, and he was just listening in, and he said that actually this audience tools that we are using now in this Hangout Meet, it works independent of meeting software. So we could put a small link at least into the email. But I think that if Laura is online, maybe you could put a link in the chat as well. But I think that that's something that you might be wanting to look into, Jarno, because it's quite easy to use. As you can see, we are able to present. So you might want to try that out. But yeah, I think you're being brave going on by yourself. Definitely, if you have any chance to have anybody, even a colleague, a coworker, a friend, if you want to get those questions in. But I think that that's one thing that you might look into, this Q&A tool that we've been using, since it's quite simple to use. It's rather easy to use.
And something that came to my mind as well, if possible, I don't know if it is for the technology and the time frame here, but it's also doing polls. So if you have kind of ready-made questions, so making polls, that's really interesting as well. So having people interact with your question more than actually asking questions. So that's also.
And there are several online tools for that. I don't want to go into those right now, but I think that that's easy, that they can just literally, multiple answer, like multiple question kind of answers and so on. So yeah, but I think we're going to have to go forward. But great question, Jarno. I'm really happy you asked it, and it reminded me now that the audience tools actually works with other things. I forgot that, so that's great. Thank you, Lauri, for answering that. Yeah, so we want to just briefly go into what if something goes wrong. So we've been talking about these, like we're trying to put a positive spin, and we didn't want to just go on the whole catastrophe realm. So we were trying to look for methods and ideas that we want to share with you. But when things go wrong, it's inevitable, and I just want to remind people that it happens. It's just, don't stress too much. But we do have Emma Laiho online, and she's our design director at Frantic, and we were just discussing that it would be nice to hear some other voices than mine and Ida's. So Emma, if you're online now, love for you to share an anecdote of yours about something that has gone wrong, or how you've been mitigating problems, and maybe give a little introduction to yourself.
Yeah. Hi, thank you, Liisa. I worked in the design field for about 15 years now, like Liisa, and in many different positions. I think the longest period I was working as a visual designer. And over the years, I worked with lots of global clients, and some of those I never got to meet face to face. So remote meetings were totally the normal for us. And one thing I had to get used to during that time was that usually there was always people who were only joining through any meetings, whether it was Skype or Hangouts. They were joining through phone, and that was because of bad connections or some technological glitch, or just because they were on the road and really busy clients. So yeah, that was the norm. And how I tackled this, especially when asking for feedback for my designs, I always sent them beforehand via email, and also the questions I wanted to, or like describe what kind of feedback I wanted, so I could at least make use of the time we had together, even if they were on the phone. And sometimes also then a follow-up email to summarize what we were talking about. So people could look at the materials beforehand, or with another device or something like that.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point, is that let's say now Zoom has all of a sudden, brought the level of, like, people are using these video conferencing softwares, but really reminding people that people phone in. People do phone in, and it's really normal. Yeah, it's very normal, an enterprise level and so on. So you also have to be ready for that, so that even when you think faceless, there are people who are calling in to the conference, and they don't have a possibility of the video. I think that's
now we're all stuck inside, but usually it was that someone is on the road and really busy.
Yeah, exactly. I've had to do user interviews. I did a user interview actually just now in the fall 2019, and the person I had to interview actually was in the car and driving between two cities, and she had to make use of all the time that she had. So she was actually, she couldn't look at the service that we were trying to ask her about. So she just talked and explained as much as you could, and then we had to just use that data. So it was very interesting to also remind ourselves that, when we think that we're online and we are going to be in the video conference, that maybe not everybody else is there, and how are you going to make a plan B and a plan C and a plan Z for that? I think that's really important. Yeah. So, but I think that now I just don't want to say cut you short, Emma, but
it's okay.
So to have you talking with us.
Thank you.
I just want to check if we have any other questions from our audience. But thank you so much. Yes, and then I'm just going to check now. Let's see. Do we have still something that we haven't touched upon? I think it would be great to talk about that. Let's see. I'm just looking. Well, we had one question here that we could tackle really quickly. If any tips for facilitating a workshop, let's see, meeting when there are people from different cultural backgrounds or countries attending. So I think that this is something then that we should maybe, we've been discussing this briefly with Ida as well, like things like this, that I think maybe I don't look so much at cultural backgrounds, but countries, meaning like time zones already, people are at home now with their kids and so on. And I think that there's a lot of context now, especially, that you have to really take into consideration. And that's something that we might be, when you're trying to activate people, getting people into the sessions, maybe asking people, like, is everybody, now comfortable, like you said, Ida, setting the mood and making making people feel comfortable, but then also asking them if they are comfortable with the video on prior and so on. And so if you're not acquainted with the person, that's something to take into account, whatever their cultural background or wherever they're from, is that really, do you know, are you familiar with the participant or not? That's where you should start. And if you're not familiar, then you should try to maybe find out maybe their status, maybe send a brief survey beforehand. That always helps. And people like those kind of details, I think.
Yeah, definitely preparing for that, and yeah, being considerate, but at the same time, I think this is a great opportunity to also embrace the cultural differences that we have. It has been wonderful to actually get to see people in their home environment. So I think this also gives it a nice little twist as well, so that it's like you really see people on there as real as they can be. So I think it's also a great opportunity as well. Of course, being considerate of you have to know the culture and you have to understand the culture where the person is coming from. That's always a good thing, of course. But then now you have an opportunity to actually share that with others as well, and kind of compare that, like, hey, where are you? What are you doing?
Yeah, definitely. Well, actually, we are rounding in on the end of our session now, but we just had a couple of closing remarks. Ida, if you would just lead us with those.
Yes, just bringing everything together. So in a nutshell, just make sure you have those goals. Now more than ever, you're going to need them on an online setting. You really want you to understand and know them, remember them, and the participants to know what is the goal of the session. Manage those expectations, but still be ready to adapt. Always be ready to adapt, because you never know what's going to happen on a face-to-face sessions. It's so much easier to kind of quickly change your plan, but when you're online, of course, you're restricted in a way. Encourage that participation and contribution. That's how people really feel engaged with your session. So make sure that they're contributing in any ways that possible. Of course, again, remember the size of your your session or the participants. Yeah, and then experiment with the purpose. Like I said, try new things. That's great, but always have a reason why you're doing it and make that visible. Show that to people why you're doing it and where is it going and where is it leading. And then lastly, collect the data. Make sure that you have the information for the next time and just learn about it. And yeah, that's how you become better at what you're doing in general terms.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just wanted to thank you, Ida, for doing this with me, and thank you, Aina, for moderating our chat. That was great. We will definitely have more Frantic live sessions, so please fill out the feedback form. We at Frantic have a wide pool of experts in design, tech, and agile leadership who thrive in this decentralized teamwork environment. So this is our jam. This is what we live for. So if your organization needs help with digital service development, drop us a line at sales@frantic.com. You can see it on the slide there. And we just really want to thank you for joining us today. And we hope to see you online somewhere, either in LinkedIn or drop us an email. Our email addresses are there as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.